Thursday night, June 18th, 1936, approximately 10:45 p.m., outside a two-story brick social club on Steinway Street in Astoria, Queens. 13 black men in dark suits stood on the sidewalk. Behind them, three black Packard sedans, engines still warm. In front of them, a building where 32 members of the Ku Klux Klan were holding their weekly meeting. The man at the center of the formation was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, 48 years old, dressed in a charcoal gray suit with a black fedora. No guns visible, no weapons drawn. Just presence, just calculation. Just 13 black men standing outside a KKK meeting in a white neighborhood in Queens. Inside the building, someone looked out the window. Then another. Then the talking stopped. But here's what the Klan didn't know. Bumpy Johnson had been planning this moment for exactly 3 weeks. He had their names. He had their addresses. He had photographs of their families. He knew where they worked, where they ate breakfast, which church their children attended on Sundays. And he was about to make sure they knew that he knew. What happened in the next 17 minutes didn't just stop the KKK's campaign of terror against Harlem. It changed the way black organized crime leaders thought about protecting their communities. This is the story of how Bumpy Johnson used intelligence, restraint, and psychological warfare to defeat racial terrorism without firing a single shot. Before we get into this, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching this from. This story needs to be heard. Harlem in 1936 was caught between two worlds. On one side, you had the tail end of the Harlem Renaissance. The Cotton Club was still pulling crowds. Duke Ellington was still playing. Black businesses on 125th Street and Lenox Avenue were thriving. The neighborhood had money flowing through it, culture, art, music. It was the black capital of America. But just across the Harlem River, just a few miles into Queens and the Bronx, the Ku Klux Klan was active, not just in the South. Right here in New York City, local klaverns meeting every Thursday night. Businessmen, dock workers, police officers wearing white hoods on weekends, planning intimidation campaigns, firebombing black-owned businesses in mixed neighborhoods, leaving threatening notes, burning crosses. Most of Harlem's legitimate leaders were fighting back through legal channels. The NAACP was filing lawsuits. Ministers were organizing peaceful protests. Newspapers were writing editorials. All of it necessary, all of it important, but none of it stopping the immediate violence. Then in the first week of June 1936, the Klan made a mistake. They crossed a line. June 5th. A black-owned barber shop on the edge of Harlem received a typed letter. Closed down or burned down. No signature. But the message was clear. June 8th. A jazz club on 131st Street found a wooden cross on their doorstep. Doused in gasoline but not lit. A warning, June 12th. Outside the Cotton Club, 11:30 at night after the last show let out, a cross was set on fire. It burned for 6 minutes before someone threw water on it. The fire department didn't show up for 45 minutes. But the threat that changed everything came on June 14th. Stephanie St. Clair, the queen of Harlem's numbers operation, received a phone call at her office above a restaurant on 7th Avenue. A man's voice, accent from somewhere upstate, told her that her runners had 1 week to stop operating north of 110th Street, or they'd start disappearing. Stephanie St. Clair ran a $50,000 a month operation. In 1936, that was the equivalent of roughly $1.1 million in today's money. She employed 200 people. She paid protection to the right cops. She had connections to every major black leader in Harlem, and she was not someone who responded well to threats. She made one phone call. To Bumpy Johnson, June 15th, 1936. Monday evening, approximately 7 p.m. Small's Paradise nightclub, 135th Street and 7th Avenue. Bumpy sat at a back table with 5 men. Stephanie St. Clair was there. So was Casper Holstein, who ran his own numbers operation. 2 men from the docks who moved contraband up from the ships, and Theodore Freddie Jackson, who owned 4 nightclubs and had the best intelligence network in Harlem. Bumpy listened to the threats. He listened to the cross burnings. He listened to the phone calls and the letters and the intimidation. Then he asked one question. What do we know about them? Theodore Jackson pulled out a folded paper from his jacket. Thursday nights, every week, Social club in Astoria, Queens, Steinway Street, 30, maybe 40 members. You got names? Bumpy asked. Working on it. Bumpy looked around the table. Here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to wait for the police to protect us, because half the cops are probably in that meeting. We're not going to hire lawyers, because by the time they file papers, somebody's dead. And we're not going to just shoot at them, because that brings federal attention we don't need. He leaned back in his chair. We're going to do something they're not ready for. We're going to show them that their greatest weapon, fear and anonymity, doesn't work when we know exactly who they are. Stephanie St. Clair smiled. You planning to pay them a visit? I'm planning, Bumpy said, to let them know that Harlem knows. Over the next 3 weeks, Bumpy Johnson ran an intelligence operation that would have impressed any military strategist. He paid $500 to a postal worker who had access to mail routes in Queens. That's $11,000 in today's money. The postal worker provided addresses of anyone receiving mail from known KKK-affiliated organizations. He paid $200 to a janitor who worked in the Astoria Social Club. The janitor provided a list of 12 names, men who showed up every Thursday night and stayed in the back room until midnight. He sent 2 of his best men, both light-skinned enough to pass in white neighborhoods, to surveil the social club for 2 full weeks. They documented arrivals and departures. They wrote down license plate numbers. They followed members home and noted addresses. By June 17th, Bumpy Johnson had a leather notebook with 32 names, 28 addresses, photos of 14 individuals, and workplace information on 19 KKK members who were actively threatening Harlem. He knew Robert Sullivan, 42 years old, dock supervisor at Pier 57. 3 children lived on 34th Street in Queens. Thursday night regular. He knew Officer James Mitchell, NYPD, assigned to the 114th Precinct. Lived in Astoria with his mother, drove a 1934 Ford. Thursday night regular. He knew Carl Henderson, owned a hardware store on 31st Street. Wife worked as a school teacher. 2 daughters, ages 8 and 11. Thursday night regular. Bumpy didn't just know who the enemy was. He knew where they were vulnerable. June 17th, Wednesday evening. Bumpy's office above the Rhythm Club on 132nd Street. 12 men sat around the room. These weren't just muscle. These were soldiers. Men who'd been with Bumpy through wars with Dutch Schultz, negotiations with Lucky Luciano, conflicts with other Harlem operations, men who knew how to follow orders and how to think strategically. Bumpy opened the leather notebook. He read names. He read addresses. He read details about wives and children and jobs and routines. The room got very quiet. Tomorrow night, Bumpy said, we're going to Queens. We're going to that social club on Steinway Street. We're going to stand outside while they're having their meeting. And we're going to have a conversation. One of the men, Marcus Heavy Wilson, asked the obvious question. We bringing heat? You're bringing nothing visible, Bumpy said. You're wearing suits, dark suits. You're wearing ties. You look like businessmen, not gangsters. If they start shooting, then we defend ourselves. But we're not going there for a gunfight. We're going there to deliver a message. Another man, Thomas Reed, asked, what if the cops show up? Bumpy smiled. Then we tell them we're having a peaceful assembly on a public sidewalk. We're not breaking any laws. We're not threatening anybody. We're just standing there. 13 respectable colored gentlemen out for an evening drive. The men in the room understood. This wasn't about violence. This was about psychological warfare. Here's what you need to understand, Bumpy continued. The Klan operates on 2 things, fear and secrecy. They burn crosses at night. They wear hoods. They send anonymous threats. Their power comes from you not knowing who they are. They can be your landlord, your grocer, the cop who pulls you over. That uncertainty, that fear that they're everywhere, that's their weapon. He closed the notebook. We're taking that weapon away. Tomorrow night, they're going to know that we know. They're going to see 13 black men standing outside their secret meeting. They're going to understand that their names, their addresses, their families, all of it is known. And then they're going to have to decide if terrorizing Harlem is worth becoming targets themselves. I want to know what you think about Bumpy's strategy here. Was this the right move? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, but the execution required precision. Bumpy laid out the rules. Rule 1, no visible weapons, nothing in hands. If you carry, it stays concealed unless someone shoots first. Rule 2, no talking unless I talk. You stand there. You look at them. You let your presence do the work. Rule 3, no matter what they say, no matter how much they yell or threaten, you don't respond. You don't react. You stay calm. Because the moment you react, you lose the psychological advantage. Rule 4, when I say we leave, we leave. No heroics, no last words. We deliver the message and we go. The men agreed. They understood. Bumpy selected his team carefully. Heavy Wilson, 6'3", 240 pounds, former boxer, absolutely fearless. Thomas Reed, cool under pressure, had a photographic memory. Raymond Smooth Parker, sharp dresser, intimidating without trying. 3 Johnson brothers, no relation to Bumpy, who'd fought together in the Great War and knew how to move as a unit. And 8 others, all trusted, all disciplined, all willing to drive into a white neighborhood in Queens and stand outside a KKK meeting. On June 18th, Thursday morning, they did a rehearsal. They met in an alley behind the Rhythm Club. They practiced standing in formation. They practiced silence. They practiced the walk to the cars and the walk away from the cars. They practiced staying calm when Bumpy had some of his other men yell racial slurs at them. It sounds strange rehearsing something so simple, but Bumpy Johnson understood that in high-pressure moments, people default to training. If you practice staying calm under pressure, you stay calm under pressure. If you practice discipline, you stay disciplined. By noon, they were ready. By 9 p.m., they were dressed. By 9:30 p.m., they were in 3 cars heading toward Queens. The drive from Harlem to Astoria took 22 minutes. 3 black Packard sedans moving through the night, crossing the Triborough Bridge, the city lights reflecting off the East River. The temperature had dropped to 64 degrees. Clear night, no rain, good visibility. In the lead car, Bumpy sat in the back seat. Heavy Wilson drove. Thomas Reed sat passenger. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the engine and the tires on pavement. As they crossed into Queens, the streets got quieter. Fewer people. Residential neighborhoods. White neighborhoods. Every black man in those cars understood the danger. Police could stop them just for being there. Residents could call in a disturbance. Someone could start shooting and claim self-defense. But they kept driving. Steinway Street. 2-story brick buildings. Small businesses on the first floor. Apartments above. The social club was in the middle of the block. Number 37-212. A sign out front said Astoria Community Association, but everyone knew what it really was. 10:42 p.m. The 3 cars pulled up across the street from the social club. 10:45 p.m. 13 men stepped out of the cars. They formed a line on the sidewalk, Bumpy at the center, 6 men to his left, 6 men to his right, arms at their sides, faces forward, looking directly at the building. And inside, through the second-floor windows, you could see lights on, shadows moving. The Thursday night meeting was in session. For the first 30 seconds, nothing happened. The 13 men just stood there, silent, present, undeniable. Then someone inside looked out the window. Then someone else. Then the voices inside got louder. At 10:47 p.m., the front door of the social club opened. 5 white men came out, ages ranging from mid-30s to late 50s, work clothes on some, business suits on others. The lead man was Robert Sullivan, the dock supervisor Bumpy had in his notebook. 42 years old, over 6 feet tall, the kind of man used to giving orders and having them followed. Sullivan stopped on the top step. He looked at the 13 black men standing across the street. His face went from confused to angry. "What the hell do you want?" Sullivan yelled. Bumpy didn't respond immediately. He let the silence sit, let the tension build, let Sullivan feel uncomfortable. Then Bumpy stepped forward, just 1 step, enough to separate himself from the line, but not enough to look aggressive. "Robert Sullivan," Bumpy said. His voice was calm, clear, loud enough to carry but not shouting. "Dock supervisor, Pier 57. You live at 2847 34th Street. with your wife Margaret and your 3 children. Robert Jr., age 14, Catherine, age 11, and Thomas, age 7. Sullivan's face changed. The anger shifted to confusion, then to something that looked like fear. Inside that building, Bumpy continued, you've got Officer James Mitchell from the 114th Precinct. He lives at 1829 Steinway Street with his mother, Helen. You've got Carl Henderson, who owns the hardware store on 31st. His wife Doris teaches 3rd grade at PS 122. You've got 29 other men whose names, addresses, and families I know just as well as I know yours. More men came out of the building now. 8, 10, 12. They crowded onto the steps and the sidewalk. Some of them had objects in their hands, bats, pieces of pipe, but nobody made a move. You've been sending threats to Harlem, Bumpy said, burning crosses, making phone calls, telling our business owners to shut down, telling our people that you're going to make them disappear. He took another step forward. Here's what I came to tell you. We know who you are. Every single one of you. We know where you live. We know where you work. We know where your children go to school. We know where you eat breakfast on Saturday mornings. We know what time you get home from work. We know everything. The KKK members stood frozen. Some of them glanced at each other. Some of them looked down. The psychological shift was visible. They were no longer the intimidators. They were the intimidated. Harlem is off limits, Bumpy said. You don't send letters. You don't make phone calls. You don't burn crosses. You don't touch our businesses, our people, or our streets. Because if you do, if even one black business in Harlem gets threatened again, we won't need to burn a cross on your lawn. We won't need to send you anonymous letters. You'll just wake up one morning and realize that we know how to find you, and we won't be standing across the street next time. Sullivan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Bumpy held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he turned. He walked back to the line of men. He nodded once. All 13 men turned in unison. They walked to the cars. Doors opened. They got in. Engines started. At 10:51 p.m., the 3 Packard sedans pulled away from Steinway Street and headed back toward Harlem. Behind them, 32 members of the Ku Klux Klan stood in front of their social club, watching them go. Nobody followed. Nobody retaliated. Nobody called the police. The message had been delivered. In the 72 hours after Bumpy Johnson's visit to Astoria, 3 things happened. First, there were no more threats sent to Harlem businesses. No letters, no phone calls, no crosses burned. The campaign of intimidation stopped completely. Second, Officer James Mitchell requested a transfer to a precinct in Brooklyn. He moved out of Astoria within 2 weeks. Third, Robert Sullivan stopped showing up to Thursday night meetings. According to people who worked at the docks, he told his family they were moving to Pennsylvania. By July 15th, his house on 34th Street was empty. The Astoria Clavern continued meeting for a few more months, but the membership dropped. By September 1936, fewer than 15 men were showing up to Thursday night meetings. By the end of the year, the social club closed. Bumpy Johnson never spoke publicly about what happened that night. He didn't need to. The story spread through Harlem like wildfire. The man who protected the neighborhood. The man who stood up to the Klan without firing a shot. The man who proved that intelligence and strategy were more powerful than violence. But the impact went beyond just stopping one group of racists in Queens. Other black community leaders in New York took note. In Brooklyn, in the Bronx, in parts of Newark, people started organizing their own intelligence networks. They started documenting threats. They started identifying the people behind the anonymous intimidation campaigns. They realized that the Klan's power came from fear and secrecy, and that both could be taken away. Bumpy Johnson's approach became a blueprint, not for violence, not for retaliation, but for strategic resistance. Know your enemy. Make them vulnerable. Force them to understand that they're not invisible. And sometimes the threat of exposure is more powerful than any gun. The KKK continued to operate in New York through the 1930s and 1940s, but their activities in Harlem and the surrounding black neighborhoods dropped significantly. They learned that terrorizing communities where leaders like Bumpy Johnson operated came with consequences they weren't prepared to face. What Bumpy understood, what made him different from so many other men in his position, was that real power doesn't come from who can be more violent. It comes from who can be more strategic, who can think 3 moves ahead, who can identify weakness and exploit it without ever crossing the line into recklessness. That night on Steinway Street, 13 black men stood outside a KKK meeting and changed the equation. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't wait for legal protection. They didn't hope that someone else would solve the problem. They showed up. They made their presence known. They made it clear that they would defend their community with intelligence, courage, and calculated action. And it worked. Here's what I want to know from you. What would you have done in Bumpy's position? Would you have approached it differently? Drop your answer in the comments. I really want to know where in the world you're watching this from. Drop your country or city in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button. We've got more untold stories of strategic brilliance, street intelligence, and the real history of organized crime in Harlem. These stories need to be told. Make sure you're here when we drop the next one. Bumpy Johnson showed that protecting your community doesn't always require violence. Sometimes it requires information, sometimes it requires courage, and sometimes it requires standing outside your enemy's door and letting them know that you know exactly who they are. That's power, real power.